For over 300,000 years, Neanderthals were the dominant human species on Earth. They survived ice ages that would have killed almost anything else. They built tools. They buried their dead. They created art. They controlled fire. They hunted mammoths, woolly rhinos, and cave bears. They were physically stronger than us, more muscular, with thicker bones and larger brains. By every measure, they were built to survive. And yet, around 40,000 years ago, they vanished. Every single one. Gone from the fossil record as if they had never existed. For decades, scientists blamed the obvious suspects. Climate change killed them. Homo sapiens outcompeted them. Disease wiped them out. Volcanic eruptions destroyed their habitat. These explanations were neat, simple, and satisfying. They were also wrong. In April 2026, a team of researchers, led by Professor Ariane Burke at the Université de Montréal, published a study that changed everything we thought we knew about why the Neanderthals disappeared. Using methods borrowed from conservation biology, the same tools scientists use to predict which endangered animals will survive and which will go extinct. Burke mapped the habitats of both Neanderthals and Homo sapiens across Europe during the last glacial cycle, between 60,000 and 35,000 years ago. She tracked how their territories shifted as the climate warmed and cooled. She measured how connected their populations were to each other. And what she found was both simple and devastating. The Neanderthals did not die because of the cold. They did not die because Homo sapiens was smarter or stronger or more technologically advanced. They died because they were lonely. Not lonely in the emotional sense, lonely in the structural sense. Their populations were isolated. Their groups were small. And the connections between those groups were weak and fragile. When crisis hit, a harsh winter, a failed hunt, a disease outbreak, they had no safety net, no neighboring group to trade with, to share food with, to exchange mates with. They were islands, and one by one, those islands sank. Homo sapiens, on the other hand, did the opposite. Burke's study showed that the regions where Homo sapiens thrived were far more connected than the regions where Neanderthals lived. Our ancestors built networks, not roads or cities, but social networks, webs of relationships between groups that stretched across hundreds of kilometers. When one group ran out of food, they moved to a neighboring territory and were taken in. When a group lost too many members to hunt effectively, they merged with another group temporarily. When genetic diversity dropped, they exchanged mates with distant communities. These networks were flexible, resilient, and adaptive. Burke called them safety nets. She said, when there are climate, ecological, or population stresses, groups can shuffle about within that network. That word, shuffle, is the key. Homo sapiens could shuffle. They could move, adapt, merge, split, reconnect. Neanderthals could not. Their world was divided into pockets, small groups clinging to favorable locations, especially in southwestern Europe, the Iberian Peninsula, southern France, the Atlantic coast. These refuges were real. The habitat was there. The food was there. But each pocket was a dead end. When something went wrong, there was nowhere to go and nobody to ask for help. The situation was even worse in Eastern Europe. Burke's model showed that Neanderthal populations in the East were critically isolated. They had fewer connections, smaller groups, and less genetic diversity. When Homo sapiens arrived with their extensive networks, the eastern Neanderthals were gradually absorbed, not conquered, not killed, absorbed. They interbred with Homo sapiens, and generation by generation, their distinct identity dissolved into the expanding human gene pool. In southwestern Europe, the story was different, but the outcome was the same. Neanderthals held on longer in their refuges, places like Gibraltar, where some of the last known Neanderthals lived as recently as 28,000 years ago. But these refuges were increasingly isolated. Cut off from other populations, they became vulnerable to the smallest disruptions. A bad winter, a disease, a decline in prey. Eventually, the last pockets collapsed. But here is the part of the story that changes everything. The Neanderthals did not really go extinct. Not completely. Because they interbred with Homo sapiens, their DNA lives on, inside of us, right now. Every person of non-African descent carries between 1% and 4% Neanderthal DNA. That means if you are European, Asian, Middle Eastern, Native American, or Australian, there is Neanderthal code running in your cells at this very moment. Some of those genes are still active. Neanderthal DNA has been linked to immune system function. Certain inherited genes help us fight off infections. Other Neanderthal genes are associated with skin and hair characteristics that helped our ancestors adapt to cold climates. Some researchers have even linked Neanderthal genes to increased risk of depression, blood clotting, and addiction. The ghosts of the Neanderthals are not in caves. They are in your blood. And the irony is profound. The species that went extinct because it could not build strong enough social connections survived anyway, by connecting with us at the most intimate biological level. They could not network their way out of extinction, but they networked their way into our genome. So what does this mean for us today? Burke herself pointed out the modern relevance of her findings. She said that these ancient dynamics serve as a reminder that human survival has always depended not just on intelligence and technology, but on our fundamental ability to forge and maintain connections. Think about that in the context of the modern world. We live in an age of increasing isolation. Social media connects us digitally, but fragments us physically. Communities are shrinking. Loneliness is now classified as a public health crisis in multiple countries. The average number of close friends a person has declined steadily for decades. We are, in a sense, becoming more like the Neanderthals, more isolated, more fragmented, more alone. The Neanderthals were stronger than us. They had bigger brains. They survived ice ages we cannot even imagine. But they disappeared because their groups were too small and too far apart. They lacked the one thing that turns a collection of individuals into a civilization: connection. We survived not because we were the smartest or the strongest. We survived because we were the most connected. And 40,000 years later, the lesson is exactly the same. Connection is not a luxury. It is a survival strategy. And the species that forgets this does so at its own peril. This has been the Odd Vault. If this unlocked something in your mind, subscribe, because we open a new vault every week. What they didn't tell you, we will.